Thank you, Tom. I hope everyone can hear me. If you can give me a check mark or a thumbs up if you can hear me. There we go. So far, so good. Ooh, and a ding even. All right. So today, my job's to sort of wake you up before you have to drive home, depending on what time zone you're in. So I'll work on being a little bit lively here. I want to talk about reference in the crowd. I heard Tom mention it as reference in the cloud, and that's an interesting concept. It certainly fits in here. But when I'm putting these together, I was thinking a lot about where's reference and digital reference and virtual reference going? And I'll take some blame in the whole virtual digital name game thing with reference. I called it digital reference early on because I wanted to get digital library money from the National Science Foundation. Virtual reference was really the term of art, and then I created a project called the Virtual Reference Desk, so even I'm confused. So I just use them interchangeably. To me, they're the same things. And I'm really interested in where we're going. And not where we're going tomorrow or not where we're going the day after tomorrow, but we've been doing this for 10, 12 years. And I think it's time that we really spend some time thinking, what are we going to be doing in 10 or 12 years from now? Because I hope it's not what we're doing now. I hope we can take advantage of some of the new technology, new platforms that are coming in, and really look at some cool things. So we're going to talk about reference in the crowd, and I will give you the warning. Brainstorming ahead. For those of you who can't read it, I've got these sort of, this is the part of the brain that's for this, and this is the part of the brain for making crap up. So that's where we are today. I've been speaking a lot recently about new librarianship and the need for deep thoughts and deep concepts and worldview and plans. And I still think the best that we do as librarians comes from deep concepts. But we might get lost in this. And that we need to take some time to dream and play. We've been spending a lot of time being directed, and how can we assess things, and how can we set these things up, and what are the details, and I think we need to spend a little time dreaming and playing. You know, there's time for experimentation as well. We need to experiment, play, and then bring things back for implementations to come up with the answers of whys, absolutely. But we also need to spend a good amount of time in why nots. I think all too often we get so obsessed with process and how we do it and what's the technique and how do we do this and how do we implement it, and I don't want to screw it up, and let's have a committee. God help us, let's have another committee, and we'll need a policy. If there's only a way to come up with a policy for this before we can do it. So forget it. What we're going to do here is we're going to do the pre-policy, pre-planning, pre-worrying about it. The why is an important question, but we need to spend a little time in why not. And that's when I think about the future, it's a why not thing. And so if we look a little bit at the sort of evolution of reference and virtual reference in general, and I won't belabor this point, but we sort of started in email. Let's see, I can use my fascinating indicator here, email. And if you zoom it up far enough, you can see who I've been emailing. And email worked out really well. And so, but it was asynchronous, it took some time, but anyone could do it. I mean, I remember sort of playing the role of Johnny Appleseed and saying, you can do virtual reference. They're like, how? And we said, do you do email? And the answer was yes. You're doing virtual reference. All these librarians were walking around with hundreds of messages sitting in their inbox, and they were already doing it. They just didn't do it in a coordinated fashion. Also had some interesting thoughts in privacy, but we won't go there. So then comes the sort of classic virtual reference look, right? It's got something on the left for page pushing, something on the right, which is a chat box. It starts at the bottom, works up. What people may not realize is where this came from. This came from a fellow by the name of Steve Kaufman, who I know has been mentioned already. And Steve Kaufman, a librarian out in California, talked to, at the time, different help desk vendors and implemented one of the help desk solutions online. He was very interested in how Land's End was doing support. And they had this sort of model. No one tested it. No one sort of looked in virtual reference and did user surveys and user behavior, whatever. It's kind of like, that's what we do. And what's amazing is I remember getting up in San Jose, and I think it was 2004, or no, I'm sorry, San Antonio 2004, going, why? You know, what's there? What could be next? Shouldn't we look at this? And we really haven't. So now let's talk about, we're now moving into things like text messaging, real-time messaging. We're moving into areas of instant messaging. So we've seen an evolution of the tools we've done. And underneath, you'll see some bullet points of some things that I think we really have pushed reference forward, not just virtual digital reference. So the first one was the idea of remote reference, that we could do reference and not be in the same room. Now, I know a presenter earlier mentioned this little technology obscure thing called the telephone that we had been using to do that, but now we could see that we could do it in electronic, we could do it online. And there were articles, I have to say, in the mid and late 80s, there were reference articles that said you can never do reference unless they're at the desk because you can't see them. You can't see their body language, you can't see the grimace, you can't see their ugly, but we knew we could do it. Time shifting. We knew now that we could partner with people on different coasts in different countries and different time zones, and so we could answer questions before the library opened and after the library closed. We could do it with whole networks behind it, and that was pretty cool. We learned that we could suddenly do quality in a whole different way. Quality analysis in reference was no longer waiting to see how many people rushed to the desk after the mean librarian got off duty. Chuck McClure, who did early surveys and studies in reference, he would tell the story about, it'd be this room, crowded people, and a reference librarian sitting at the desk, and no one at the desk. And that reference librarian would get up at the top of the hour and go back to their office, and a new reference librarian would come and sit, and everyone would rush to the desk because that was the nice reference librarian. Right? Well, now we can actually see whether they answered the question as opposed to whether they were nice. So we have situations where people will answer reference questions, we can review the logs, we can look at it after 10, 20 minutes, we can see what's happening, are we getting proper answers, are we not getting proper answers. It really has changed how we've looked at quality in reference. Peer-to-peer, that when virtual reference grew, digital reference grew, it didn't grow initially, and even to this day, around a traditional hierarchical structure. Right? We didn't have to form into a regional consortia that would take questions and pump them up to a state-based consortia that would bump them to a national, to an international, to a galactic consortia, and come down and go through 12 years of filing before we got to it, and who's a net answerer and who's a net questioner and all that kind of stuff. What happened was people just said, hey, you're cool, you're doing virtual reference, here's some questions, send me if you're overloaded, and suddenly this whole bizarre peer-to-peer system set up. It had a really interesting effect, which was suddenly people at Ivy League colleges were answering questions from community college kids, and the public questions were going across into government libraries, and it was an amazing mix where suddenly it all became about reference librarians, not reference librarians as defined by this silo. And finally, I think the biggest overall impact that virtual reference has had has been the disconnect of reference from the collection. That we've seen that you can do reference, that there's value to answering people's questions, even though you may not have a physical or even virtual collection that you can share. That you can answer a question from a person in Syracuse, New York, from San Jose, California, even though you're not in the same physical facility. Even though they may not have the same licensed databases, there's still value in doing this. And so we really did take the idea of the reference collection and killed it. The reference collection has become just the part of the regular collection and how we've shared it. So I want to start with, there have been great advances that virtual reference has brought to reference in general. However, in all of this evolution from tools and these new things, there's one thing we haven't really taken on, and that's this. We haven't really taken on the fact that the desk is still there. Now you're saying, but Dave, it's virtual, there are no desks. Well, maybe Second Life we can build a desk, but where's the desk? The desk is still librarian waiting for someone to approach them, ask a question, provide an answer in a one-on-one interaction, right? We're now doing it through, the desk is an email address, or the desk is a web form, or the desk is even an instant messaging form. But in essence, the user, the member of the library still has to seek you out, still has to come into your turf, still has to use your tools, of which you have better tools than they do, to get the answers. It's still very much tied to this sort of 1920s version of someone walks up to a librarian and asks a question. They have to do the walking up, there's a librarian, and the desk is still a form of status. So where can we go from here? Well, in order for me to start thinking sort of outside of this model and thinking about where we could go, I wanted to look at an analogy. I wanted to look at something else that has changed, and something really hit me the other day, which is there was a fascinating interview talking about maps on NPR, and I wish I could look up the actual one. But they were talking about the difference that cartographers had today than they used to. That cartography and map making used to be about where stuff was. You know, this is where the land is, this is where the water is, this is how many feet is apart, etc. And it used to be about fidelity to the geographic condition. It's changed radically now because it's become much more of a social thing, where what you call a place isn't about where it is, it's about who's naming the place, right? Is it the Persian Gulf or is it the Arabian Gulf? Well, it kind of depends on whether you're from Iran or whether you're from Saudi Arabia, about which one those things are. And so it really got me thinking about, let's take a look at something that migrated from a print, well understood, well documented world into an electronic world, and see if we can find some analogies. So we'll start by taking a look at the first major shift. Because whenever technology is introduced, the first reaction we have to it is to adopt current processes to the new tools. That in essence we want to replicate how things worked before. In fact, the first MARC records, they actually, when they reproduced the MARC computer records, had the holes for where you would put the big rod when you put them in card catalogs, right? We really tried to make it look exactly like that. And so, you know, in the glory days of MapQuest and soon with Google's domination of it, we ended up with a digital version of a print map. Now, it could do a lot more, don't get me wrong. There were still some extensions to what it's doing. But in essence, it's a map. And we can put locations on it, except now instead of having to go to AAA and get triptychs that we can flip things through, now it'll draw pretty lines for us. But it's still a map. And so what happened was, as we looked at this, people began to say, well, what else could we do, right? And we can keep extending this, sort of working in the same venue, working in the same idea. And so now taking a look at, say, a Google Maps implementation, right? So after a while, these extensions to this print form look different, right? So so here's 3D. Now we can look at Manhattan, and on Google Earth, up pops the buildings, and we can see it in 3 dimensions. We could begin to layer information on top of it so that we can look and say, well, what's restaurants near here? We can add images and bus schedules. But keeping up with our analogy here, you know, the digital reference consortia and logs is a lot like what's happening here, right? That we were still answering questions from the desk, though now the desk was a piece of code. And we sort of said, well, but we can answer as a group. So let's talk library to library and peer to peer. So we were doing something different because we could actually move questions quickly, but it was an extension of what we were currently doing. A great extension, but still an extension. So we're still looking at, in map world, something that we're familiar with. It's a map, but it's a little bit cooler than just a regular map, but it's still a map. So now we go a little bit further, and so we get things like Google Street View, right? So now we can take advantage, since we're in a digital environment, of linking previously disconnected information. So in maps, this idea of Street View, right? So the idea is that now I have a map, but I can link it to a collection of pictures, because that's all Street View is. And so now I can go look at where I am. So I have 2 databases, and I fused them together. I have a map and an image, and I've integrated them in a unique way. Still a map, but now Map Plus, and a new interface that combines them, right? So for us, integrating asking a question, for example, directly into a database or catalogs, right? So that now when someone's searching in an Elsevier database because you paid too much and someone's stuck, you can say, got a question, help us here. Or when you get 0 results in the catalog, what were you looking for, ask us. And so now we're combining other data sources that we know well, that we use well with reference. So we're fusing these things together. We're getting farther away from the analog we could do beforehand. And we can look at that going even further. I mean, the idea here is that a GPS system is, you know, isn't GPS just sort of like texting a reference librarian, you know, where we need it in the form where we want it? The idea of now it's convenient, right? So now our map is where we're driving. And now with texting, our reference librarians where we're looking through the stacks, or we're at a bar with a great bet, or whatever it is. But the idea here is still a map, right, et cetera, et cetera. So what happens when we begin thinking about what else can we do with this? And so we're starting to see this. Well, let me stop for a minute here and just point out. Virtual references like this GPS. Think about how you used to use a map, right? I don't know about you, but I remember as a kid pulling over to the gas station, going into the gas station, looking at the big map on the wall and going, where am I and how do I get wherever I am? So it's like gas station to gas station. Or you'd actually pay the $6 and you'd unfurl the map and your father would be cursing and you could never fold it up again. Right? Map skills used to be how to fold a map again. You know, now you tell a sixth grader a map and they're like typing. They're click, 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 here it is. And what's amazing is when the maps went from, the cartographers, when they were looking at digital maps, probably went through this great time where, will they still need us and will it be important and will people care about us anymore? Now it's everywhere. I mean, you buy a phone and it's got a map in it of the world, right? You move someplace, everything's got a map in it. In fact, by law, every cell phone has to know where it is for 911 services. So this idea that by getting in a more convenient package, by moving to a digital environment, by getting to the place of people's use, that's good. We like that. Now, let's go to the next step, though, which is now what we're seeing in the map world, is really moving out of extension and adaptation and into invention, right? And so we get things like Foursquare, or we get Facebook's Places, where we can check other people in and break up their marriages. It's a great thing, right? So now the idea that if I've got a map with me everywhere, which is very map-like, I can suddenly use it to do very different things. In this case, social things. So I can go to a place and I can say, here I am. Oh, look, Angela's here too. Let's have lunch, right? Or who else is around me? I'm not going there. Whatever it is, right? But this is a radically different thing. Cartographers didn't think about this. Where we were in the world of this making as much as we get out of the digital context, we were still very much in the map maker's world. So when you look at Google Maps, they control the maps, they at least buy and control the sources of the maps, and they control the applications on top of it. Now what we're finding is people are layering whole new services on top of this digital infrastructure you built that you may not control or expect. So now we get into a world where it's not the cartographers who are controlling the applications, it's the users, the consumers, the members that are going in there and say, this is what I want to do with it. Now that I got this ability, I want to try all sorts of things. I want to experiment. And it's so cheap and easy and fluid and ubiquitous, I can just try anything. And so when we look at this, this is really step one. Step one is now we can put ourselves on a map. So when I hear about things like Second Life and virtual worlds and all this other stuff, I go Google Maps. To me, that's where it's going to happen, which is now I can go into Manhattan, I can see Manhattan, and I can put myself right there and say, who else is there? Now we can go and take this one step further. So in the upper left here, you'll see a screenshot of something called Waze. This is an interesting thing where people build their own maps. Since you have GPS sitting in your phone, as you drive through the country, you run this little app on your Android phone or your iPhone, and it maps where you are. And it does this with hundreds of people on the same road. And pretty soon you know not only where the road is, you know the average speed of that road, you know who else travels that road, you know when the traffic jams are of that road, you know instantaneous data because you have a network of people building that map information in real time. Oh, and then what you can do with that is you can take it and you get to sort of the whole augmented reality thing. So now when I have a phone that's aware of where I am, and I have an app on it, I can go and say, put up the picture and say, where am I? And it says, here's the information, here's what you can see, here are your Twitter friends sitting next to you, and restaurants 3.8 miles this way, etc. And getting really cool, this is the new Bing map interface. And if you haven't seen their TED Talk, go find it. Where what they're doing is they're saying, here's Pike's Market, or in the public market in Seattle, thank you, Seattle. And what's nice about it is they say, you know, every day, thousands of tourists, like me, show up with their cameras and their picture phones. And these days, when you take a picture, somewhere in there is a geolocation saying this picture was taken where. And now what they can do is they can go harvest things like Flickr and they can automatically map all those images to a place, and then using alignment algorithms, they can actually map all the pictures onto this physical location. Now what that means is street view, which was you driving by the market, but when people walk in the market and take pictures, they now know that and they can combine them together. So now what you're going to be able to do in Bing Maps is walk right into farmer's market, walk around, take a look at it, not because the Microsoft Bing folks showed up and took all those pictures, but because you did. And they're gathering that data and putting it together. So this isn't something that a cartographer thinks about, but because that infrastructure is there, we can do radical things with it. So what we end up with in the map world is a revolution. Looking at each individual steps to a brand new thing. So starting with our print map, using my little pointer, we end up with an interface like this. You know, as you're driving along, it's giving you street directions. It's telling you which way you're looking on a regular map. It's telling you interesting areas and locations. And these days, this is what the automakers are saying, this is what your windshield's going to look like. It's going to tell you things like you're getting too far in this other lane. It's going to have radar data built into it, so you're too close to the car in front of you and automatically put on your brakes. It's going to stop you from backing over that tricycle behind you. This is in development now. And it's not science fiction, it's not crazy, and you can sort of walk each step together. But what it comes down to is if the map makers had stopped with a map is a geographic description, it's a location of places, and not built an infrastructure, opened it up, and brought in lots of other data and new ways of thinking about it, if they hadn't thought outside of the piece of folded paper, we would never have ended up with this other innovative world. So when I look at reference, I think the same thing. I think, well, where can we go with this, right? So if this is the sort of transition that maps have made, what's the transition that reference can make? So before I go any further, and we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers and dialogue here, but before I go any further, I want to just start with I have no idea where to go from here, right? I'm going to pitch some ideas, I'm going to talk about some possibilities, and really only one specific possibility. But the short answer is it's up to all of us to think of this. It's up to all of us to come up with some new ideas. So let me break through a few things, and I'm going to start with a personal apology, which is if we look at virtual reference, sort of the short form, what is it? Now this is something called the General Digital Reference Model, of which I'm to blame for. And what I want to point out about it, let me just walk you through it in 10 seconds. A user, maybe more than 10, asks a question, some form of triage occurs, whether that's automatic, the next librarian takes it, or the librarian in this library takes it, and if not, it goes to an out-service librarian, or whether it's a human comes in and picks. That triage then occurs where a group of experts, librarians, will answer the question, that's here. Then some tracking will occur. We talked about quality control where we build, we can go in and look at transcripts. And then some mechanism occurs where we do something with those transcripts. So let me show you this in an so the reason I bring this up isn't just to say, remind you of this. It's actually to show you Dave Linkus got stuck thinking inside the desk as well. This model, which was put together first in 1997, and could still apply to a lot of systems, but it really is about one person, one librarian, organizing it back and forth. It's still sort of this idea that the user comes to the service. So we need to blow it up. And to blow it up, what I think we need to do is we need to look at something even simpler. So I'm going to walk you through this. So down here at the bottom is sort of reference present. This is how we're doing it now. Up here, signified by the jetpack icon, is the future. Because in the future, we will all have jetpacks. If we do not all have jetpacks, it is not the future. That's when you'll know it arrived. All right, I used to use flying cars, and then I thought about it for a moment, and I thought 16-year-olds flying at 30,000 feet above my house might be a bad idea. So I'm back to jetpacks. All right, so what we have is how do they get to us, right? So when they have a question, how do they get to us? Well, currently, you need to find a place. They need to find us. Now, that place might be something like a username in instant messaging, or it might be the desk, the physical desk they're walking up to, or the desk software, or it might be a URL. And a huge amount of our effort is about getting out the word. So I heard a previous speaker talking about cha-cha and how their daughter knew the phone number off their mind. Marketing. The idea was to market, market, market. And we want tent cards when freshmen move in, and we want bookmarks for public librarians. But the point is, we want them to come to us, and what we have to do is get them to remember to come to us. In the future, what we want to look at is really being embedded. We want it when they come to a problem or a situation, there we are waiting, right? So the idea of being not at the desktop, but in the application. When someone is writing their term paper in Microsoft Word and they get stuck, can they ask a question from within Microsoft Word? Right? Think about it in a university context when we install Microsoft Word on all our machines around us. We know where we are. We know who they should be talking to. Why can't we install the plugin so that right within Microsoft Word, here's spell check, here's reference check, and be able to be right there? Be within the device. So when they, I forget, Google pays a lot of money to Apple to have their little Google search within Safari. We can go for pity, but the idea is why not have, right in there a built-in app. In a text. As they're reading their ebooks on their Kindle and they run into a great idea or a new problem or a word they've never seen before, why aren't we sitting waiting for them on a Kindle or a Nook or pick your device of the day? Right? Be right there within the text. So now that they've sort of gotten to us, then we have to look at how we answer the question. Currently, we're in this one-to-one mode. Right? So they come to us, and either through things like subject librarians, because they're engineering folks, or this is the people who do genealogy, or this is the kids librarian, or we do it through some other form of consultations, of getting them to the right person. We move them around, but we do it in a serial fashion. So it's not like when someone walks up to the reference desk, there's like the team ready to just tackle them and take their question and run about it. It's like one to one to one to one. Well, in the future, let's think about this in more a social environment. Which is, I hate to break this to anyone here, but the idea that somehow librarians are the only one that human beings ask questions of is insane. Right? I was in Italy, and they were talking how the public libraries are radically different than the US libraries. I said, how so? And the person I was talking to, he says, in Italy, when we need the recipe for making sauce, we ask our mothers. Right? The idea is that in different cultures, in different age groups, in different societies, in different communities, people have different tracks they go to for answers. We know from study after study, the primary source that people use are the people next to them and their friends and buddies. How did you get in this course? Well, I bribed the teacher. That's what I'll do, whatever it is. So the idea here of being in that social environment, being one of. So we talk about things like an e-science coordinator. So this is an area that we're working on here in Syracuse and elsewhere. But the idea in an academic library, we have scientists. We have faculty members who are busy breaking atoms and laws and everything else. And they're busy working on science. And it turns out that more and more of science, whether it's in the humanities, social sciences, physical sciences, is about data. Right now, the idea that if you're going to study a geological formation, you're dealing with terabyte data sets that you're working through. And you're probably working with colleagues all over the world on it. Well, I was trained as a geologist, not as someone who coordinates terabyte data sets and talks with people all over the world. And so the idea of having someone connect with that information, having someone come in who helps me do my work well and takes away the burden of information, which itself is a discipline that we know a lot about, is something we're talking about. And you can extract that idea or expand that idea to information coordinators. So now when the mayor comes in and asks the library a question about economic development or youth violence, you have coordinated teams that go out and prepare briefs for them, prepare information, prepare statistical reports, prepare what happened in Philadelphia versus what happened in Oklahoma, etc. And then we look at the results and we talk about, well, what do we do with these answers? So right now, the answers are we throw them in an archive. Now, it can be a really pretty archive, right, where we have edited knowledge bases and previously asked questions, or it can be what most of us have, which is a really ugly archive of all these transcripts by date. And we can go in and look at date. But let's talk about instead turning that result into a service. So that service is we take the data out of here and we bump it back into our catalogs, which we will replace with knowledge discovery systems. That's another speech. But the idea here of back into augmented reality. If I answered a question about a place and someone's at that place, shouldn't they be able to look up previous questions and answers at that place? And so what might, let's see where I'm going from here. Always a good question, right? So let's take a look at what this stuff might look like. Now, some of you may know or care, but I did something before about scapes and how people can lay out in virtual work tables and all that. And I have a URL there, and we'll push it out, and you can go take a look at, you know, some ideas about how we could sort of replace the reference desk with a work table. Instead of a member, a user coming in, walking up to the reference desk and asking a question, they walk in and they're given a virtual table. And they sit at that table and they begin laying out resources, materials, and their notes and making piles. And then they begin inviting friends over to say, how did they do it? And then they begin inviting professors over and librarians over, and they're sort of communally working out, how does this world look? But I'm going to leave that for a minute, and I'm going to take my own advice, and we're going to do a little sort of dreaming here about what else this might look like. And unfortunately, I think, Tom, this all got smashed together as one slide, so I'll have to walk you through it. But imagine now, so this is a picture of my wife. We went to Rome in April, which I highly recommend. And so we're walking by the Trevi Fountain. And so I pull out my iPad, because I'm just that much of a geek. And of course, this is the special iPad that has a camera in it, as it always should have, damn it. And I pull it up, and I sort of take a look at the scene in front of me. Now, before we get into the whole, Dave, you're with your wife, you're in Trevi Fountain, and you're playing with technology, leave it alone. I've already dealt with that. It's my life. Leave me alone. But what happens? So one of the things I love is that Washington has their own app. Washington is an app where you can ask questions. And it's kind of cool. It's a little chat app, and you can get information. This is the app I want the next person to build. So Caleb, you're not busy. So the idea is you bring this up. And the first thing it says is, because we have all the cartographers with us, we know that you are here, right? So there's your map. And not only that, yeah, you can borrow my iPad with a camera, no problem. And it knows where I am, and it has Trevi Fountain. And then right underneath, might be a little hard to read, it'll tell you this is how many questions we have answered about here and here. They were either answered here or about here. And because we know who you are, we have a standing profile, this is how many of them are relevant to tourism. We know you're in Rome, you're a tourist, you've already sort of set that up within your app. So it says, here's all of them, here's the stuff on tourism. Not only that, but we know who's online that's an expert in sort of the Trevi Fountain or Rome. And so these librarians may be sitting in Rome, they may be sitting in San Jose. And we know they're online in real time, right? So this is not maybe and if we'll get it, we'll push, they're there. And so at any time, you can drop into a nice little chat environment to ask them what's going on, talk about this. For example, why am I throwing a coin in this fountain? Is it true that I'm going to be pickpocketed if I continue to chat with you? Why does my wife have that look on her face? Whatever it is, that's going to be in that chat environment. We could even have the delightful little scrolling questions coming in at that time about this area to get a sort of situatedness. We can also have the augmented reality information, like, for example, the main figure here is Oceana, the god of all waters. And because I have standing queries, once again, it knows who I am. Here's a restaurant 300 meters down here that sort of matches the kind of stuff you would like, right? My point about all of this is this doesn't look like a desk. How many women in movies have thrown? Yes, exactly. So the idea here is this is reference because, and it's not reference because I'm talking to a person. It's reference because, yes, I can get that personal consultation. I can talk with the people, but all the data and systems and everything built, that the environment that I'm in, that environment is orchestrated by reference librarians and a reference philosophy, right? The data's there, it's combining multiple data, but in essence, what the librarian is the reference librarian has become is not the answerer of a question, but the curator of an information environment. They are, in essence, weaving together multiple answers, questions, information sources, environments, capabilities, and data right here. So maybe the way that this little sticker got attached to this guy is that someone came up, they asked the question, who is that guy sitting in the middle? And the reference librarian, rather than saying, the guy, little to the left, over, look here, actually knows where you are. It's all geotagged. You have the exact GPS coordinates. Actually pushes the marker right onto your screen. Attaches it virtually so that going to like a Google Maps interface, they could actually put that marker there. And that marker is then resident for the next person who shows up. So over time, what we can begin knowing is, well, that's who that person is, but who's this person here? Let me push you, not a page, let me push you the contextual data. And since it's geographic, I'm going to push you a pointer. I'm going to put that little dot on, not on the map, but on the figure. And so now that that becomes a new pointer, and I walk away, the next person with their app walks in, and now that information's there. And they can filter through it. I haven't thought through all the things. It'll be marketing. Caleb will be on that. So my point of this is we need to think bigger than just how do I answer a question better, faster? How do I just deal with these transcripts? What we're really talking about, what reference is at its heart these days, is someone needs to know something. They need to solve a problem. And what we're doing in reference is we're attempting to orchestrate answers and resources and basic communication skills and interpersonal skills to orchestrate an information environment for them to find that answer in. Sometimes that environment can be so anemic it is simply a citation. And we've worked with how anemic can that environment be. Do we need to push a page, or is just a URL enough? Is a part of an article enough, or do you need the whole thing? But we haven't looked at the upward boundary of reference, which is how full can that information environment be? How much could you orchestrate an environment around an individual? This can be everything from apps, but I noticed that Drexel and a few other colleges, when the incoming freshmen, they get assigned a personal librarian. And they come in and they consult with them on a regular basis. They look over their coursework. They talk about resources they may need. They talk about resources about the local area and dormitories and their interest in cycling clubs. That's a very rich reference environment. It's a very rich interpersonal relationship, right? Here's one that's virtual. The point of it is it's not about questions and answers. It's about problems and solutions. And so we weave these together. So let me just finish up here with a few thoughts. It's time for us to chart a new course. First of all, we need to think out of the desk. We need to get beyond the desk. And if you're sitting at a desk watching this, stand up. I don't care, right? We need to dream big. Because what's amazing about, that little app I showed you in augmented reality, that's doable now. It could take some time, but it's doable now. That windscreen I showed you where people are driving through and it's showing you directions and watch out for the deer and all that is doable now. I'm going to talk about ebooks in a few weeks. And what I want to say is we can do such cooler things in ebooks than take, Emily Post and put it on a screen that we can read out in direct sunshine. We can do better than that. We can dream bigger. We need to answer the member question eventually. And here's the eventually part, which is in most of my talks, I just end with the idea of we need to answer the questions and we need to think of all this. But I neglect the most important point, which is we need to take time to dream. We need to take time to invent and play. I think we're so worried about that 15-second IM message coming up that we don't take the time to go, why the hell am I using IM when that person's a call away, a click away, a talk, I can walk over and see them, whatever it is. Because when we look at reference, reference itself is a revolution. Reference itself began as a revolution. It began as the idea that we were going to take the most expensive resources, the most expensive acquisition a library has, an employee, and put them directly in front of the user. Right? We were no longer going to be content with them going through their own catalogs and their own indexes and their own obscure finding aids. We were going to actually listen. And in doing so, what we did was we fused ears onto the library. Now the library wasn't just about where experts told us what we collect and put together. Now we listened to what people were asking us. And over time, that constant pressure we get from talking to people and asking people, all that pressure eventually changed what we did. We began to talk about things like popular materials in libraries of all sorts. We began to talk about things other than books and more media and DVDs, good Lord. We began to understand that the physical spaces weren't just about quiet nooks where people took their materials, but they could be about where people gathered and talked. We eventually, that pressure that came to the library through this reference revolution made us think about not quiet buildings with loud rooms, but loud buildings with some quiet rooms. And now we're continuing that pressure where we're looking at libraries as places to generate knowledge, not just places to catalog it or check it out. We need to continue that revolution online. We need to take advantage of the technology. We need to play with this. But ultimately, we need to go in and say, what is the richest information environment we can afford, that we can technologically provide, that we can staff, but ultimately that solves these problems. And in doing so, the next time we have the future of reference conversation or virtual, digital reference, it won't matter because it will have been here. We'll all have our jetpacks on. It'll be fun. Right? So ultimately, my final line, then take as many questions as you want, is stop being boring. Stop thinking about just I am, and stop thinking about the fact that we can take these questions and answers, and get really freaky. Scare your coworkers. I mean, walk in tomorrow with a big whiteboard and marker and start drawing crazy ideas. Because if we don't do that, we can't make it happen. You know, the famous line of, you know, if we ask, I think Tom, you use this, right? If we asked people what they wanted, we would have made faster horses rather than automobiles, etc. Who do you think's going to build it? We're the Fords. We're the people who have the creativity and the insight. This is our field. This is our wheelhouse, information and environments. And if we sit back and wait for other people like Cha-Cha or Apple or Google or whomever to invent this stuff, we've abdicated our responsibilities to our communities. We've given up the opportunities for ourselves, and it's just a shame. So I'm going to stop there, say thank you very much, and take questions, comments, and things thrown at me. There you go. Let's see if we get anything thrown.
Okay, thanks, David. Any questions for David? I guess I'll lead off because I got the mic. It's not good totally, and I'm just being totally, but I think there's a big problem. I think it's a big problem, and I want to get your take on this. I think that the way libraries are funded is like we're on a collision course with reality here. So you're in Rome, and you're mashing up all this information. You know, and this mentality that, oh, you know, our service population lives between the county line on the south and Main Street on the west, and there's this kind of balkanized sense of who our community is. I think it just has to go. But I don't know how to do that, because that's where the money comes from, property taxes and tuition and fees and stuff like that. And so it's really tough to say all of a sudden all libraries are serving not only theoretically, but really anybody in the world. I think there's a big problem. Funding, how libraries are funded has to change fundamentally, I think, or we're going to be like totally out of sync with what users want to expect in terms of information services. What's your take?
I'll take that on a couple levels. One, libraries have gotten extremely good at being inventive with not a lot of money. And they've done it through consortia and partnerships. And that clearly is something to play here. But let me walk through sort of two other views. One, it costs you absolutely nothing to draw on a whiteboard. The idea of the actual dreaming and inventing and provoking and prodding needs to get out there. Resources do not come followed by invention. It is always invention followed by resources. So when OCLC grew big, they grew big through copy cataloging because it was solving a real problem, but it didn't start with everyone getting together and going, copy cataloging, that's the solution because we all know it, and we have this extra money lying around, let's do it. So one, we need to be provoking. I've found that some of the most creative individuals are those that work on the shortest budget. I mean, it's in essence, you know, maybe it's because I'm from Syracuse and we're used to being scrappy. We used to be in the idea that we had to fight for everything you got, but it made you be very creative in how you get it and how you do it. So I think the idea of, first we need some really good ideas, then we need to be really creative in how we fund them. We need to look at them in a consortial model. I don't disagree with you that over time we need to take a serious look at boundary-based funding, but boundary-based funding has also supported some really cool things. I think we also need to stop buying Kindles, realizing that they don't work for our library, and then like posting this world like it's a grand new invention because we all know it. What if instead we all pooled our money together and said, hey, let's build our own? You know, so I think that this idea that we need to work across boundaries, but we also need to have those good ideas. And there's nothing that says a good idea has to come from Cupertino. And there's nothing that says a good idea has to come from a Google marker. And nothing that says that you have to have $10 billion and just people lounging around all day whimsically thinking. Creativity comes from, you know, what is it? Need is the mother of invention. Necessity is the mother of invention. You know, if working in environments that are relatively poor can actually lead to great ideas, and then capitalize them to get more resources for what we're doing. So that app, if we came up with it, tell me we couldn't sell that for $1 a piece, right? And sell 1 million of them, and then we have $1 million, right? And maybe we could even sell it for $3 a piece. I don't know. But the point is, we need those ideas and generate those ideas. We can get the resources. We've shown our ability to do it. It's not going to happen in one library getting, you know, every library going for it, but as a consortium we can move ahead. So, general thoughts there.